Protesters took to the streets of Iran again on Friday, a day after a man was put to death in the first execution over recent anti-government protests. 23-year-old Mohsen Shekari was hanged on Thursday after observers described as a show trial. Now, activists are warning that at least a dozen more Iranian protesters are facing the same fate. But that didn't stop demonstrators from once again voicing their opposition to the regime.
Death to Khamenei, protesters shout in Zahedan on Friday. They also took to the streets in other cities like here in Ruzza, one day after the execution of a 23-year-old demonstrator. Others are also facing the death penalty, the most prominent rapper Toomaj Salehi. He was arrested nearly 40 days ago. The musician was forced to make a confession on state television, a common procedure in Iran.
Music can spread violence. That was my mistake. I apologize to all of you and to society.
On Friday afternoon, we visited his uncle in Bochum in Germany, where he runs a copy shop. Naturally, he's watched the confession video. He told us his reaction.
A feeling of hatred, of rage towards the Islamic Republic. What I saw in this video is that Toomaj didn't speak voluntarily. The voice of Toomaj was not one that was full of energy and joy to express his inner feelings.
While Salehi has not yet been convicted, Dr. Hamid Geher Hassanlu has already been sentenced to death. He was convicted of participating in the killing of a militia member at a protest in the city of Karaj, despite his denials. The doctor and his wife were arrested and beaten in the night, according to his brother, who lives in Amsterdam.
4 of his ribs were broken during torture. One of the ribs injured his lungs, and that caused internal bleeding.
The radiologist had to be operated on 3 times, his brother told us. Shortly after he woke up from the last operation, the 53-year-old was sentenced to death. His wife was forced, under torture, to testify against him. The only proof that Salehi is alive is his forced confession. His uncle is deeply concerned. The family hasn't been able to visit him since his imprisonment. 2 cases out of many that highlight the brutality with which those in power in Iran are dealing with protesters. Nevertheless, many Iranians agree that it's worth fighting for.
Frau, Leben, Freiheit.
Well, let's speak to Daniela Zeberi. She is an Iranian activist based in Germany. It's good to have you with us here on DW News. Now, in that report, we've just witnessed a number of testimonials of a situation escalating in Iran. Could you just bring us up to speed on what activists and protesters have been telling you from Iran?
They're telling me that the regime is trying to frighten them. But what we see in the videos we get, what we hear from the people, what we read from the messages they send us, is that the courage is way greater than the fear. And that's what we're seeing also in Baluchistan and Zahedan happening yesterday, it was 1 day ago, where the people of Baluchistan and Zahedan went out on the streets again, went out to protest again, even though week by week they're getting slaughtered by the regime. We see that in Kurdistan, we see that in Tehran, we see that everywhere in the country. People are not letting the regime frighten them.
But we are continuing to see more heavy-handed tactics by the government. What does this mean for the protesters living there?
The government already announced that they are getting harder and more brutal against the protesters. But you see, it's about surviving for the people in Iran. It's about the bare minimum. It's about freedom and surviving. And because we know that the people know that they don't have a future with this regime. So that's why they still go on the streets and protest. And also they know if they stop going out of the streets, then that's it. Then 18,000 people and more who got arrested will be hanged, just like Mohsen Shekari was hanged a few days ago.
Now, more Western sanctions are being imposed on Iran. Will this make any difference?
I hope there will be full sanctions on the regime this time, because what we have seen from the European Parliament so far was like, I don't know what it was. It was like, for example, the morality police, Gashte Eshad, was sanctionized in the first package, but that's weird because the Gashte Eshad, the morality police, doesn't have any money to be frozen. They also don't have money to enter the European Union because they said we won't let them enter anymore. That it was good to sanctionize them as a symbol, but for me it's better to also sanctionize the whole Revolutionary Guard, the RGC, responsible for so many deaths, not only Iran but in the whole world. For me it's important to sanction the regime. For example, the 272 politicians that voted for the execution of all these political prisoners, and that's what I'm missing in the sanctions the European Parliament is doing all the time, and that's what I'm hoping for the next sanction package, that the regime will be sanctionized.
Okay, Daniela Zeberi speaking to us in Germany. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And the European Union is considering further sanctions against Iran over the executions. Our correspondent Jack Parrock in Brussels has more on the likely form of those measures.
We've heard now from France and Ireland to say that foreign ministers meeting in Brussels at the start of next week are going to sign off on fresh sanctions against Iran. They could potentially involve putting 20 people on a blacklist of travel bans and asset freezes. Clearly, a lot of those people probably don't actually have an intention to travel into the European Union or perhaps their assets here, but it will be symbolic. Also, they'll do something similar to one entity. This is also over the protests since the death of Mahsa Amini, but also now since an Iranian gentleman, as part of those protests, was executed in Iran, which the European Union broadly is completely against the death penalty anywhere and is very concerned about this issue. Now, we won't know the exact details of what the sanctions that are put on are until the foreign ministers meet, but we are pretty sure that they will come into place. The question is, what does this mean for the broader context of the European Union trying to pull Iran and the United States back into the Iran nuclear deal, which is intended to prevent Tehran from gaining access to a nuclear weapon, but which Iran says it then wants economic opening up to the rest of the world, and also the questions of its relations to Russia, because sanctions have been placed on Iran for it sending drone equipment to Russia to support its invasion of Ukraine. The big question is what power can sanctions have? Neither Iran nor Russia, for that matter, have really changed their path or their ways in the way that the Western powers would like them to, no matter how many sanctions have been put on.
We're going to speak now to Siba Shakib, who is an Iranian-German writer, filmmaker and activist. Her work is focused on women's rights and religion in Iran, where she was born and raised. It's really great to have you on. Welcome to our show. These death sentences are a clear and brutal warning from the regime. What do you think is keeping the protests going?
You know, thank you, first of all, for having me today, the Day of the Human Rights, where I get goosebumps thinking even about it. All the rights are being abused and are being violated by the Islamic Republic. And these people, my Iranian people, go on the street and risk everything to protect and to defend the human rights, and not just for themselves, but for the world. And what keeps people going on the street is they have nothing to lose, nothing more to lose. 70% of people in Iran are facing hunger or live below or at the poverty rate, and they have not much to lose. And one thing is very, very important to understand. Having been born as a third second, fourth generation in some cases, under a repressive regime like the Islamic Republic. Every day, every time you leave the house, every time somebody rings the bell or makes a call to your phone, you have to fear that something terrible is going to happen to you. The young people in my country have become resilient. Nothing can scare them anymore. Even death cannot scare them anymore. And they go out and they fight for human rights.
You're saying that the protesters have nothing more to lose. It appears from what you're saying that they're not going to back down. It appears the regime is not going to back down either. So with neither side giving ground, where do you expect this to all go?
It's a very ugly situation, and the regime exactly knows that they cannot survive, but they are still killing people. A drowning regime, the only answer they have is to kill people. And they want to, in my opinion, they want to gain time to get their money and their possessions out of the country. We have heard news in the past 2 days, and we have had news from right in the beginning of the revolution that the high-rank Islamic Republic leaders are already transporting out their possessions, money, gold, jewelry, and so forth, and their families with private and secret flights. And now they talk to Venezuela to get permission to live there with their families, and they try to get out the possessions. I think they're just trying to gain time. This is the absurdity of this current situation. These days, like you said very rightly, everybody knows. In the beginning, it was only us saying this regime is done. This time the revolution will win. But now everybody knows, even they themselves know, that they are not going to come back to power anymore, but they are still killing people. It's just to gain time. It's just because it's like a fly that you have killed and it's fighting.
Siba, I want to just ask you finally about this execution of Mohsen Shekari. World leaders, including here in Germany, have condemned his execution. They've announced fresh sanctions against Iran. Do you think this is going to make any kind of difference at all?
You know, I think whether it makes difference or not at this point is not even important. But what is crucially important is that these thugs and the leaders of the Islamic Republic, the criminals, the murderers, the child killers, the rapers, that they know that they cannot make one single step without the world seeing it and without the world reacting to it. And I think that's what counts. And I am grateful to every country and its people and its leaders and governments who actually do react to every step that these criminals take.
And we're grateful for your time. That was filmmaker and activist Siba Shakib. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving the people in Iran a voice, and I am just a loudspeaker. Thank you.